pre-launch testing in the 48 hours of the countdown preceding liftoff today. That is less than 25 minutes from now. Back live now from the Baikonur Cosmodrome with this view. Once the Progress reaches its preliminary orbit, 8 minutes and 45 seconds after launch, once it separates from the third or upper stage of the Soyuz booster, control of the flight of the Progress vehicle, the unpiloted Progress 69 cargo craft, to the International Space Station will revert to the Russian Mission Control Center in Korolyov outside of Moscow, where Russian flight controllers are standing by ready to take over the operation. You see this view, a live view from a balcony camera at the Russian Control Center. They will be in charge of the Progress's flight to the International Space Station. Again, a 2-orbit rendezvous is planned, and what that involves basically is just about 40 minutes or so after launch, there will be a long 77-second burn of the Progress's engines called a DV1 or Delta Velocity 1 burn that will adjust the altitude and fine-tune the Progress's path to the International Space Station. The automated rendezvous sequence, basically the Progress entering the neighborhood of the International Space Station, will commence a short time after that. And then after a series of small mid-course correction burns, the Progress will arrive in the vicinity of the International Space Station to begin the typical fly-around of the station to precisely align itself with the aft port of the Zvezda service module, which will be the port of call for Progress's docking today, that is scheduled for 6:24 a.m. Central Time, 7:24 a.m. Eastern Time. Just a few minutes ago, flight controllers here in the Johnson Space Center's International Space Station Flight Control Room, under the direction of Flight Director Anthony Varia, took a poll, and they're all go for launch. That was relayed by Varia to his Russian Flight Director counterpart at the Russian Mission Control Center in Korolyov, half a world away. So everything is on track for liftoff just 22.5 minutes from now. The Progress is loaded with just over 3 tons of food, fuel, and supplies for the International Space Station and the Expedition 54 and 55 crew members yet to fly to the station. That manifest breaks down to 1,940 pounds of propellant, 48 pounds of oxygen, 53 pounds of air, 926 pounds of water, and 3,128 pounds of dry cargo, spare parts, and supplies. A total of 6,095 pounds of cargo loaded in the Progress 69 cargo craft, about 3+ tons of cargo about to be delivered to the International Space Station. The Expedition 54 crew is up and around, ready to begin its workday from left to right. NASA astronauts Joe Acaba and Mark Vande Hei, Alexander Mazurkin, the Expedition 54 commander. Next to him is Anton Shkaplerov, his Russian colleague. And on the right, Scott Tingle, NASA astronaut, and Norishige Kanai from the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, or JAXA. They will be receiving a video feed of the launch just a short time from now, so that they can follow the path of Progress to its preliminary orbit, a vehicle that they expect to see arrive about 3.5 hours from now. At the time of launch, at 2:58 and 44 seconds a.m. Central Time, the International Space Station will be flying just south of the Aral Sea near the Kazakh-Uzbekistan border. The International Space Station actually will fly directly over the Baikonur Cosmodrome some 30 seconds after liftoff, and then will leapfrog past the Soyuz booster as the Progress heads uphill. As we mentioned earlier, the launch phase angle for this 2-orbit rendezvous, a very narrow corridor of just 15 degrees. A launch time for any vehicle is determined at the point at which the Earth's rotation carries the launch pad into the plane or path, if you will, the lane of the orbit of the International Space Station. At third stage shutdown and Progress spacecraft separation, 8 minutes 45 seconds after launch, the International Space Station will be flying over southern Russia, southeast of Lake Baikal. Just 20 minutes now from launch, everything continuing to proceed on track. No issues reported. All of the pace of activity will pick up in the final 10 minutes of the countdown. But again, the Soyuz booster, the 2.1A booster, is fully fueled, ready to lift off at 2:58 and 44 seconds a.m. Central Time, which is 2:58 p.m. at the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. This is a busy week for the crew on board the International Space Station, with the docking occurring a few hours from now of the Progress. The Russian cosmonauts on board the station plan to do leak checks at the interface between the aft port of the Zvezda service module and the Progress itself. After docking and after the Progress hooks are closed, they plan to open the hatch to the Progress later today and begin to unload some of the higher priority cargo that is being brought up on this resupply vehicle. Later in the week, another spacewalk is in the offing, this time by NASA astronaut Mark Vande Hei and Japanese astronaut Norishige Kanai, as they plan to venture outside of the Quest airlock of the International Space Station in U.S. spacesuits on Thursday morning, February 15th, for a planned 6.5-hour spacewalk to complete the movement of latching end effectors, or hands, for the Canadarm2 robotic arm. They will move a latching end effector that was removed from the Canadarm2 back in October during a previous spacewalk during Expedition 53, and they'll bring that one into the Quest airlock. It ultimately will return to Earth on the next flight of a SpaceX Dragon resupply craft to be refurbished and repaired. A spare that has been sitting on a stowage platform just outside of the Quest airlock that was removed during an initial spacewalk by Vande Hei and Scott Tingle back on January 23rd and temporarily parked on that stowage platform, will be moved to a payload attachment point on the Mobile Base System rail card to be used as a spare in the future. That spacewalk, as you saw from the lower third that we flashed up on the screen, our coverage on Thursday will begin at 4:30 a.m. Central Time, 5:30 Eastern Time. The spacewalk to begin about an hour and a half later. Vande Hei will venture out for the fourth spacewalk of his career. It will be Kanai's first spacewalk and the fourth ever by a Japanese astronaut. 17 minutes, 15 seconds now until launch. Again, everything proceeding on track for liftoff. And once again, at the time of launch, the International Space Station will be flying just south of the Aral Sea near the Kazakh-Uzbekistan border, and will fly directly past the Soyuz booster, obviously at a much higher altitude, as the booster heads uphill to deposit the Progress into its preliminary orbit 8 minutes and 45 seconds after liftoff. The milestones heading uphill for the Soyuz booster and its Progress cargo ship. The first stage separation is scheduled 1 minute 58 seconds after launch. That will be followed by the jettisoning of the launch shroud that envelops the cargo ship itself at the 3 minute 3 second mark after liftoff. The second stage engines will shut down on the Soyuz 2.1A booster at 4 minutes 37 seconds after launch. 10 seconds later, the second stage will separate. The third stage skirt will be jettisoned 10 seconds thereafter, just before 5 minutes into the flight. The Soyuz and the Progress will be propelled further on the power of the third stage engine, which will shut down 8 minutes 45 seconds after launch, followed a few seconds later by the automatic commanding of the deployment of the Progress's solar arrays and its navigational antennas. This launch site 31 is about 20 miles or so away from Site 1. That's Yuri Gagarin's launch pad, upon which the Soyuz MS-08 spacecraft will be standing on March 21st to launch the next crew to the International Space Station, that consisting of Oleg Artemyev of Roscosmos and NASA astronauts Drew Feustel and Ricky Arnold, who will lift off on March 21st at 12:44 p.m. Central Time, 1:44 p.m. Eastern Time, on a two-day rendezvous that will enable them to dock to the International Space Station on March 23rd as part of the Expedition 55 crew. Expedition 55 will begin on February 27th U.S. time with the departure of Alexander Mazurkin, Joe Acaba, and Mark Vande Hei, who will return home in their Soyuz MS-06 spacecraft for a landing on the south central steppe of Kazakhstan. Just 13 minutes away now from liftoff, everything continuing to proceed smoothly, no issues reported. Again, the crew on board the International Space Station will be standing by for the arrival of the Progress just 3.5 hours from now on this novel two-orbit rendezvous. It will automatically dock to the aft port of the Zvezda service module, joining another Progress, the Progress 68 craft that arrived at the Pirs docking compartment back on October 16th last year. This Progress, Progress 69, is scheduled to remain at the International Space Station till late August, at which point it will undock and be deorbited to burn up in the Earth's atmosphere. Countdown now inside 10 minutes, coming up on the 9.5-minute mark. Reports being received from the Russian Mission Control Center indicate all systems are in good shape as we approach the 8.5-minute mark until launch. The International Space Station is flying just over southern Egypt at this hour, 252 miles above the Earth, moving from southwest to northeast in an orbit inclined 51.6 degrees to either side of the equator. Again, the station will actually fly over the Baikonur Cosmodrome 30 seconds after liftoff. And again, the liftoff time is scheduled at 2:58 and 44 seconds a.m. Central Time, 2:58 p.m. in Baikonur, as we are now just 8 minutes from launch. Seven minutes until liftoff. The Soyuz booster fully fueled, ready to lift off. Moving into a 15-degree phase angle that will place it in a very narrow lane to reach the International Space Station just 2 orbits after it launches. And down at the blockhouse in Baikonur, the launch key has been inserted. This is an actual key that once rotated, preparations for launch are transitioned to an automatic mode. Soon there will be a series of recorders in the Launch Control Center activated that will gather telemetry from the launch vehicle during its path uphill. 2 milestones that will be very visible at about the 35-second mark into the countdown before launch. The first of 2 umbilicals that are buttressed up against the body of the rocket to replenish fuel for the vehicle will rotate away. The second of the 2 vehicles rotates away at about the T-minus 12-second mark, and that initiates the engine start sequencing. Now inside 5 minutes until launch. The combustion chamber now being purged. This means that fuel lines and other elements of the rocket's engines are being purged with nitrogen that fireproofs them by removing vapors of fuel and oxidizer. Less than 4.5 minutes until liftoff. Three and a half minutes until liftoff. So far, so good with the countdown. Once again, it will take 8 minutes, 45 seconds for the Progress 69 cargo craft to reach its preliminary orbit after it is separated from the third or upper stage from the Soyuz 2.1A booster. Seconds after spacecraft separation, the automatic command will be issued to deploy its solar arrays and navigational antennas. The key to drainage has begun. This drainage terminates the flow of oxygen into the vehicle. Again, all of the systems are go. 2.5 minutes before launch. We're coming up on the point of fuel and oxidizer tank pressurization. And pressurization has been initiated. This optimizes fuel flow and provides additional structural rigidity to the launch vehicle as it sits on the pad. 2 minutes until liftoff. Once again, very cold at Baikonur today, 13 degrees Fahrenheit. The Soyuz booster and the Progress cargo craft carrying just over 3 tons of food, fuel, and supplies for the International Space Station and its residents, about to lift off into a cloudless sky. Coming up on the 1-minute mark in the countdown. The Soyuz booster now on internal power, standing by for the retraction of the first of the 2 umbilicals. And there goes the first umbilical. The second umbilical will retract at about the 12-second mark before liftoff. And we are not seeing an engine ignition sequencing start. This is not unlike what happened back on October 12th last year, so we're standing by for further information. And it is pretty clear at this point that the launch for today has been aborted, as was the case back on October 12th. We're standing by for further information. You saw the first of the two umbilicals retracted as planned at about the T-minus 35-second mark into the countdown. But the second umbilical did not, and we did not see an initiation of the launch sequencing or the engine start sequencing. Once again, you're looking at the Soyuz 2.1A booster on the launch pad, Site 31 at the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. This is Mission Control Houston. As you have been watching the Soyuz 2.1A booster there on Site 31 at the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan should have launched about 4.5 minutes ago. It did not. This is Mission Control Houston. Once again, the launch of the Progress 69 cargo craft to the International Space Station has been scrubbed. The countdown ended just seconds before liftoff with an abort command that was sent from the blockhouse in Baikonur. To recap, the countdown had proceeded throughout the course of the day without any issues whatsoever. The Soyuz was fully fueled hours ago and was standing ready to lift off at 2:58 a.m. Central Time, 2:58 p.m. Baikonur time into a cloudless sky. The countdown moved past the 35-second mark before liftoff. The first of the two umbilicals buttressed up against the body of the Soyuz 2.1A rocket retracted as planned, but the second umbilical did not. That typically initiates the launch sequencing command, and as a result, the launch was scrubbed for the day. Russian engineers down at the launch site in Baikonur and there at the Russian Mission Control Center in Korolyov are involved right now in an analysis of the data to determine what caused this launch scrub